Welcome to the Soulful Sustainable Living podcast with Haley and Michaela, your go-to holistic healing and conscious living hacks. Today's episode is brought to you by Henry Rose. Did you know that your favorite perfume could be hiding harmful toxins? Many traditional fragrances contain chemicals like phthalates, parabens, BHT, and even formaldehyde. These chemicals have been linked to serious health issues, including endocrine disruption, cell degeneration, and even cancer. So it may be time to upgrade your fragrance routine with Henry Rose. Henry Rose offers luxury, non-toxic perfumes that are both cradle-to-cradle certified and EWG verified. I have been wearing Henry Rose for over a year now, and I personally love their scents: Queens and Monsters, Dark as Night, and Torn. I've even gotten my husband Colin to make the switch, and he wears Fog. The entire line of fragrances are gender neutral, so you can find what suits you best. We're excited to share that our listeners can enjoy $10 off their first Henry Rose order of $30 or more by shopping through the link in the show notes. That's right, $10 off your order of non-toxic luxury fragrance with Henry Rose. Just click the link in the show notes to shop. Now, back to the episode. All right, friends. Welcome back to the Soulful Sustainable Living podcast. Today, we're welcoming Lisken Hays of Whole Health Alchemy to the podcast. Lisken is a board-certified health and wellness coach, NBC HWC, and a holistic nutrition professional who is passionate about supporting clients in transforming their physical health from marginal to exceptional. We are so thrilled to learn more about lifestyle medicine today, so please give Lisken a warm welcome to the podcast.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Glad to be here.
Well, Lisken, so outside of that wonderful intro, is there anything that you'd like to add about your line of work for our listeners?
I am also a certified personal trainer, which I had to get actually for a job that I was working at a federally qualified health center. And so that was part of what I did, but not in a like gym kind of setting. And I'm a lifestyle medicine certified coach as well. So lifestyle medicine is really my passion.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Well, for our listeners, before we get into the good stuff, we're going to talk all about lifestyle medicine, what it is, how we can add processes and tools and techniques and systems into our own lives. Why is this topic so important? Why should our listeners care?
Interesting. So, my journey towards lifestyle medicine was really non-traditional. I worked for 25 years in higher education, was feeling a little burned out in that, and was approaching my 50th birthday and sort of was like, okay, this is not the life that I imagined when I turned 50, where I wanted to be. And so I was severely overweight, obese, and decided, okay, I'm going to do something about all these things. Like I would not go engage socially because, I had gained all this weight. I didn't want to see people. And so I decided I would go see my doctor, and my doctor really just didn't know how to help me that well. Here's a prescription. And I was like, no, prescription is not really for me. I grew up in a real natural, practical kind of family where, medicine isn't, even though my grandfather was a doctor, medicine wasn't the first kind of go-to. And so I stepped back, and since I was working in higher education, I decided to explore some nutrition classes. And that led me to actually a department at MSU Denver in lifestyle medicine. And that led me to coaching. And then as I was doing my coaching, I took a class in holistic nutrition, and I was like, oh, well, this is where it is. And so started in lifestyle medicine and got my second master's degree in holistic nutrition. So very non-traditional path. And I think the reason that it's important is because chronic illness is on the rise. Obesity is on the rise. All of these things. And we do have a lot of control over that kind of thing. We don't have to accept that just because our parents had heart disease or diabetes that we're going to. There's a lot that we can do to control those things and live a healthier, more sustainable life. So
I love that. And your services directly, can you talk a little bit more about how people work with you and what it looks like to work with you in kind of with this baseline of certifications?
Sure. So I think it's important if you're working with a health coach to find somebody who is board certified, or there are a number of ways to become certified in coaching. But really, people who are health and wellness coach certified are professionals who have a background in the health and wellness field. Um, in terms of working with me personally, I do mostly one-on-one stuff. I will be starting a few groups in the new year, because I do think there's something super powerful about being in a group setting, when there are other people who are kind of going through the same thing and trying to make some of the same changes. It's really good to have that,
Absolutely.
Right.
In fact, there's a we rise by lifting others component.
Exactly.
It's much easier to do something hard with someone else who's doing the same hard thing.
Yeah.
And it's a mirror, because in health, it's such a dynamic topic that if you're in a group setting, there's a good chance that someone in the group has a characteristic in their life that you're striving for, and vice
Right.
versa. So it's such a reciprocal learning environment.
So especially, I would say that is the case in terms of when I run groups, because I have made some significant changes. So as I said, I spent most of my adult life quite obese. I am 355 pounds. And so I've lost 165 pounds at this point, and still striving, right? And so even though I have this background, it's still one of those things, like, I'm actually doing this stuff, right? In my own personal life. It's not just something that I'm talking about or I have a certification in. And so I think there's some powerful connection that can happen in that as well, is, how have I managed that? And it certainly has not been overnight.
Definitely.
So
I have yet to meet a coach that doesn't have their own personal story
Yeah,
behind
absolutely.
getting
Right?
on top of whatever it is that they share with their world.
Yeah.
And there's some impact to that as well.
Yeah.
You can walk your clients through something that you've walked through and are still walking through.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So you mentioned obesity as something, as a challenge. What are some other challenges that you've seen either in your own clients or just kind of in this world that you are kind of helping people work through your services, through these groups?
Sure.
Tell us a little bit more about what those challenges might be.
Yeah, I think it really obviously depends on the client. And what I would say is that one of the biggest challenges is probably people not finding or having the time, right, to make some of the changes and stay consistent with them. So some of it is really just figuring out what the priority is and what the vision is. And in coaching, I feel like the vision is so important, right? What do you want your life to look like? And I think that for me in particular was the driving force for, like, I didn't know what I want my weight to look like this is the weight I want to be. What I did know is I didn't want to look in the mirror and see what I was seeing, right? And I knew that I wanted to feel more vibrant. I wanted to feel like I could go be with people, and I'm not saying that if you're obese, you shouldn't be out with people, right? We have a lot of work to do in the discrimination field when it comes to body image and that kind of thing. For me personally, that was a challenge to want to engage socially when I was not feeling good about myself. And so I think one of the most important things coaches can do is really work on that vision from the get-go, right? Is what are you hoping to get out of this? And we start at that space because that's a space we can always go back to, especially when our motivation feels really low, right? And we are going to have days where our motivation feels really low, like I just can't do it today. And so
I am curious to lean on your personal experience and then what you see with your clients in the context of obesity and lifestyle medicine, because it's an interesting narrative that's currently being created in our culture and the way that I receive it. So I'm also in the wellness space. I've also taught yoga for almost a decade, and it's a very inclusive practice and truly for anybody with any body type. And I absolutely love that. There's this story around almost like accepting obesity more so than I've ever seen before. But it's a fine line because you have to love yourself at any level of growth in your life. And so you sharing your story about not like wanting to go out and like wanting to feel better about yourself. And then also there's this really like body positivity conversation coming out, which I do love. I love, like, absolutely you should feel good about yourself. And what if feeling good about yourself means taking care of like nourishing your body in the way that it needs to be nourished so that you aren't obese because that leads to other health problems.
Right.
It's a weird thing because I work with clients too, and you have to work with like the self-love component, but also like isn't taking care of yourself an act of self-love. So I'm just curious what your kind of take is on that.
Yeah, I think it's a complicated space. And I feel like, yes, we are in this space where body positivity is sort of the conversation. And there are pieces of that I do think are awesome, right? I think we should not have this sense that because we are obese that we can't participate with anything, right?
Yeah.
And if you are obese, it is very likely that you will have health problems if you remain in that space. And so how to balance that? Yeah, I don't know. And, obesity is so complex. It's for so many reasons, right? There is a genetic component. There is a potentially lifestyle component. There are so many pieces.
There's
of
an
that.
economical
There's
component.
an economic. There's absolutely. No
it's a
question.
very diverse topic, and I'm
Yeah.
so glad we brought it to the podcast because I think just bringing awareness to it. And we can move on after this, but when I travel, I just notice that there's other places around the world where they don't seem to be managing the level of dis-ease, not just obesity, but diabetes, cancer, just illness in general. Therefore, there are solutions. And I wouldn't have that contrast had I not experienced something else. And so for someone who hasn't jumped out of the day-to-day here in the US, it's starting to be more normalized. And that's what I fear. It's just like the normalization of unhealthy living.
Yeah. Although I will say what's not normalized is the increase in obesity, the increase in diabetes, which has lifelong implications, right? The diabetes space is, oof, right? And what I think is unfortunate is that many, many people and still many doctors, I think, have this idea that once you have a diagnosis of diabetes, that's for life.
That's it.
And that's just not true for lots of people. That's not true.
That's so true. Unless you're born with it, type 1.
Yeah, type 1, obviously, there's not a lot you can do about that. You have to manage that differently. But if you have a fairly recent pre-diabetes or diabetes diagnosis, there's a lot you can do. Lifestyle.
That's the gap in the conversation, though, because when you went to the doctors for not feeling well, they gave you a prescription for a lifestyle problem. Same thing with diabetes. They give you a prescription for a lifestyle problem. And so it's like bridging that gap for people.
So the problem is that most medical schools don't actually teach nutrition. And we're getting better at that. I think that is something that there is conversation in many of the organizations around, like American College of Lifestyle Medicine, is actively trying to make sure that nutrition education is starting to happen in medical schools. That helps a lot. But doctors, for the most part, aren't educated in nutrition. And so or exercise science or any of these kinds of things. And so that's where the challenge is for sure.
So interesting. Wow. I have just a lot of thoughts here. I want to get into more of like the specifics of like what it looks like to integrate into healthy routine. What does that look like? But before we do, while we're kind of on this topic, I want to dive into kind of root cause and the conversation around what comes before that diagnosis, whether it is obesity or we talked about diabetes, but like what comes before that? And is that something that you are addressing as a part of your practice?
So I'm guessing that you may be kind of intimating around the whole. So for me, what I'm thinking about when you're asking that question is what comes before that is usually lack of physical activity and lots of processed foods, right? So for me, when I'm looking at how did we get here, I think it is really this idea that we're having more and more food available. We don't have the scarcity that we once had as humans. And so, part of the challenge is our body wants to hold on to that weight, because there was a time when humans didn't have the kind of availability of food that we do now. And then with the processed foods and the ultra processed foods, they're so tasty and they're so easy and they're so, so
food product.
Yeah, exactly.
Quick access.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so we've kind of lost a taste, I think, in some ways for some of the healthier foods. So some of it is just trying to, figure out with clients, so how can we add some of these things in? And I mentioned full plate living, and we can talk about that at some point. I'm a full plate living facilitator. And I think their way of talking about and dealing with some of that issue is really around fiber, which is also
we're of an underdeveloped palate. We're used to sugar, fat, and salt because that's what they put in processed foods. So when you get something bitter like kale, or when you get something astringent, any of those other flavors that have so many other health benefits, it's so dissatisfying to
and those
someone
are the foods, right, that light us up in our brains, right? We want that then more once we've had it. So
So starting with inactivity and diet, those are like pillars.
I think that, so lifestyle medicine has 6 pillars, and this is really where it starts for me. And it's about a wellness circle in so many ways, right? So it's about a whole food, plant predominant diet, exercise, so getting the right amount of exercise, a good amount, and we can talk about that at some point if we get there. Restorative sleep, which is also tied to obesity and that kind of thing. So that's an interesting thing that happens. And many Americans are sleep deprived, as we know, don't get enough sleep. Stress management, it's 4th pillar. Avoidance of risky substances, so alcohol, smoking, all those kinds of things. And maybe we should add in processed food as a risky substance.
I mean, they've done studies on rats, cocaine and sugar,
right?
And their brain measures the sugar is more active than that drug. So,
and then the final pillar is around social connection. And so I think with the, when I think about the coaching relationship, it's really about figuring out with clients, what is your vision? What does that look like? How can we incorporate some of these pillars? And then when we're doing group work in particular, trying to get that social connection piece really, in place.
Such an undervalued
pillar
that we have access to always, and maybe just don't put the importance behind it.
An in-person connection where like we have, I think, this notion now that we are connected because of our phones, and we are being social because we're on social media, but it's not the same. Like we need that human to human connection. In things like these groups, like you're talking about, sharing or recognizing shared experience. I want to dive into that more. So what are some important healthy practices, kind of getting into those actual routines now of what we can incorporate into our daily life, whether we are struggling with a specific issue like obesity, or just kind of at large healthy things that we need to now be addressing in the through the lens of lifestyle medicine?
So that's a big question, I would say. But I think if I were to stick with maybe nutrition as the kind of bottom line, for me, I eat a whole food plant-based diet, and I say plant-based, which does mean vegan for me. And I know that some people who are listening to the podcast or in general, when I mention that, they're like, oh, no, we're not, like, I'm not ready to give up meat or cheese or whatever it is. And I hear that a lot. And that's, again, I'm going to go back to, I don't want to harp on it, but Full Plate Living is, it's a free curriculum that's online. Anyone on the podcast can go to fullplateliving.org, sign up, see their videos, all that kind of thing. But they now also have where you can become a facilitator and run groups together. And this is where I think the power is with this. But it is the notion that, first of all, very, very few Americans are getting the fiber that they need in their diet. And this is one of the things that can help us in so many ways. And fiber foods are generally plant foods. So beans, any kind of vegetable, fruit, beans, nuts, seeds, the legumes, all of that kind of thing, right?
Low glycemic index, reduces inflammation, and helps with digestion.
Right.
So there's 3 pillars of keeping your body functioning properly.
Right. Well, and if we're getting enough fiber, it also helps us clear things out. And really many Americans have problems with constipation and things like that. So that fiber, and so what we look at Full Plate Living is the goal is to get to 75% of your plate being fiber foods and 25% being kind of anything you want. So if you want to leave the meat in there, leave it in there. The meat or the cheese or whatever it is, you can leave it in there. But working on that 75%, and just, when I'm working with a client and we evaluate where they are to begin with, and just asking a lot of questions, being curious, figuring out what's working for them now, what's not working for them, and figuring out on that 75%, how can we begin to, if you're at 25% of your foods right now that are fiber foods, great.
Right.
How can we get to 30%? How do we get to 35%? What can we add in? And the other reason that I love this model is it doesn't focus necessarily on weight loss or obesity or anything like that. It does focus on getting more fiber, which is helpful. And let's see, I lost my train of thought with the rest of the other piece of that thing that I love is that it doesn't have to be perfect right now, right? You can just increase until you're getting that 75%.
Wow.
So super helpful.
You say it's high in fiber is what we're looking for. And you said it's mostly plant-based, specifically legumes, is it? Or just anything?
It's just anything that's a fiber food. So it's an interesting thing because fruits and vegetables, legumes, nuts and seeds, things like that. All the things that have fiber in them. So meat and cheese don't have any fiber, right? So trying to kind of reduce those foods and add in the fiber foods as much as possible. But it's also not just about dry fiber. There's a wet component to it too, because in order for our body to process the fiber, we need water. Right. So
we do a whole podcast on hydration and nutrition.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we really could.
That's great. So just diving into the fiber, I just love that this is like, I feel like I've been told to pair groups of foods together, but it's through different categorization, not through fiber. You know what I mean? Like it's been, take this percentage of fruits or vegetables or even grains or legumes. So it's just quite interesting to me. And when I hear you talk about again, mostly plant-based fiber, I'm assuming then, like, I feel like when I was quite younger, there was a big kind of surge in the processed food market about, this is high in fiber, like this is good for you. So I'm assuming that when we are looking for healthier solutions, it is whole foods that are high in fiber, right? Just to make that distinction.
And with the grains, I haven't mentioned grains, but it is whole grains. So brown rice instead of white rice, that kind of thing. And those can be fiber foods if you're adding brown rice. That's fine. White rice is going to end up being more in the 25%. Right?
I see. Okay.
And if it's if you're eating a bread that is high in fiber, it doesn't have the water component, so it's going to end up in your 25%. So it's interesting because when I first started looking at that, I think, well, I eat so many plants all the time. I mean, we eat salads and legumes and all of that kind of thing. And yet I was looking at my breakfast and thinking, oh,
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I eat the Ezekiel bread, but that is a dry food. And so what can I do to just make that little adjustment so that 75% of what I'm eating is a fiber food?
Well, that changes breakfast dramatically for most
doesn't
Americans.
it? Yeah, right? Cereal,
toast, oatmeal.
Yeah. Oatmeal is a fiber food if you're eating rolled oats, not quick oats, kind of thing. So that's actually a good one. And it's something that I moved to more, is having oatmeal, and then like this time of year, putting in some sweet potato, that kind of thing, just to add a little. And then I don't love sweet potatoes, which I know is weird because I feel like I would die without regular potatoes. But I've been adding some blueberries in there.
Yum.
And then, right? A little cinnamon.
While we're on the topic of strategies, we've mentioned diet. I'm curious what maybe another strategy someone could implement in another area of your life. Or another bucket or pillar of lifestyle medicine. I'm going straight to stress management because I think that impacts. It's a trickle down. If you can manage your stress, you might actually be able to go into the kitchen and eat a healthy meal, because sometimes what we eat is coping mechanism for how stressed out we are. And I see even sleep. You could address your sleep. You could also address your stress first, because if you're lower stress, you have an easier time sleeping. So how do you manage stress with your clients?
Yeah, so I use an Insight Timer, which is an app, right? And I think there are lots of different ways to do it. Even, before we started the podcast, just taking a couple of deep breaths is going to engage that parasympathetic nervous system. It's going to help us calm down, feel like, okay, we're ready for this. It can be, I'm in the bathroom, my kids are out playing, and I just need to sit here for a minute and have a deep breath.
Absolutely.
So there are tons of ways, I think, to do that. And then for me, a big one is getting out into nature. That can be at the park. That can be, I need to just walk around the block, right?
We had the wonderful opportunity of recording a previous episode with a mental health professional that incorporates nature into her practice. And I mean, she actually shared that it's just as impactful. Nature has the same impact on you if you just close your eyes and imagine yourself outside as it does actually being outside. And so there's no excuses.
Right? No excuse. Well, and in Colorado, can we possibly even have an excuse?
So
right?
true.
Look out the window to the mountains and,
Yeah. And I think if you can, going and putting those feet on the earth and grounding, and like you're saying, integrate as much as you can with nature. When we can. And when we can't, we do have that access, in our heads. Remembering that feeling, hearing the sounds that we heard, all of that. You mentioned the concept a few times of full plate living. I want you to just tell us more about this. What does it mean? What is full plate living? What does it include?
So it is really this idea that we're looking at fiber. So most of us don't get enough fiber. The average American gets 15 grams of fiber a day. We're really hoping that you're going to get 40. So there's a big gap there, right? And that's where I do think, it's the 75-25 is the idea. And it's figuring out with clients where they can add those in. And one of the biggest tips that I could ever give people is to find an hour on the weekend to prep your foods, right? It's so easy if you can open the refrigerator and it's there, or you've made huge pots of soup and, put several in the freezer, or put it in the refrigerator, or, I'm all about making sure that we're not going to destroy the environment. But if it's easier for you to buy bagged fruit or vegetables, I buy the Simply potatoes all the time, right? They're already shredded. There's no added oil. let's just use that then if we can. And, if we don't have time for other options to, pre-steam our potatoes and shred them ourselves and all that kind of stuff, I get it. Like that is one of the biggest barriers that people have. So the prepping piece is something I work a lot with clients on.
It's huge.
It is huge.
It's like making healthy food fast food. Really is what you're doing, because what do we do? It's been a long day. We went to work. We picked up the kids, for example, and it's been a long day. You don't have the energy to cook a full meal. So you just go to the fridge, and instead of a 60 to 90 minute process, 20, 30 minutes, reheat something you've already made. Just even pre-chopping your vegetables.
Absolutely.
Such a small place to start and make such a big impact.
Yes, absolutely.
I echo the food prepping being essential to that diet piece for sure.
I recently started eating like a carrot salad every day. I'm trying to rebalance some hormones, and I've heard that carrots can help with like estrogen dominance and things like that. So, but I just never did it because I didn't have any carrots. And for whatever reason, the simple act of shredding a carrot just at 2 p.m. became very overwhelming and just very like, I don't know about overwhelming is the right word, but just, it was a barrier. Yeah, exactly. And so I prepped it this week and I've been eating it every day. So it's great, it's great to take away that that barrier.
Yeah, grains are also a good, I mean, you can cook oatmeal for all week on Sunday.
Right.
Then it's this easy thing. You can grab it if you need to on the way out the door, even, or brown rice, or, all of these kinds of things are just easy to prep. And it's just figuring out, okay, how do we find time? And I mean, I think about brown rice as 45 minutes, right? Most often. So put it on and go do something else while you're doing it. Start your laundry or whatever. It's easy enough.
For our listeners, if this could incentivize you a little bit to incorporate food prepping, you only have to do the dishes once.
Exactly.
Right?
That's the other point too.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah, it saves time on so many levels.
Totally.
Yeah.
As we're talking, I totally agree with Michaela that like I want to dive into every single pillar of lifestyle medicine. It's so exciting. As we're focused on food today, I want to kind of debunk a bit of a question that I have just that I've heard floating around about organic food versus non-organic food. And does this make a difference for people? Is this something that you even recommend in your process, or is it is it just something that you kind of don't need and it's more about the quality of the food? I don't know. It's just such a big topic right now because I believe that both organic food and non-organic food both have pesticides, right?
Yeah. Well, okay. So it depends. If it's certified organic, then it should not have pesticides, is my understanding. It may have some chemicals.
Right.
Which that's a whole other story. So for me personally, I'm an organic freak.
Yes.
And if I were going to go out and suggest, for somebody to do the things like growing their own food, joining a community garden, all those kinds of things. I know a lot of people don't have time for that. I would just, that's a hard one. If you're able to, when you're able to, and if you're able to, I highly recommend organic. There's so many chemicals in our food and our food sources these days that are allowed in this country that are not allowed in so many other countries. That if you can do the organic thing, I definitely would do it. Is it better to eat non-organic fruit and veg than processed food? 100%. So it's all a matter of, what you can and are willing to do is really, for me, will it make a difference in your health and increasing your fiber if you get, bags of non-organic veg? Yeah. It's still going to be important to get those veg and that fiber in your diet. So for some people, that affordability piece is just rough. Right. And so we have to acknowledge that not everybody's going to be able to do organic.
Yeah.
Now, the whole food plant-based, a lot of people are like, whole food plant-based is so expensive and all of that. And, to be honest, there have been so many occasions since we've been plant-based that I feel like I don't spend nearly as much money. You know how much broccoli you can buy for the cost of a steak?
Mm-hmm.
Right. Like, oh my God.
That argument, the argument of the mostly, plant-based diet is more expensive is an interesting argument. And it, I think, is usually expressed by those that are inexperienced in purchasing large sums of vegetables and fruits.
And legumes. I mean, my gosh, is there anything more reasonable
than
buying
beans
legumes?
and rice is one of the most affordable diets.
Absolutely.
And I think another misconception, I don't know if you get this, but that healthy eating tastes bad. There's not a lot of options. I can remember when I began my journey into lifestyle medicine and valuing my nutrition and taking ownership of what I was eating, I was like, this is bananas. People told me there wasn't a lot of options. People told me, or that's actually maybe just what I was given from my environment. And there are more options. There are more flavors than you could even imagine once you start dabbling in that section of the store.
And, for me, it's when I'm working with people in trying different things, it's really about the spices. Like if you have barbecue beans with or without meat, what are you looking for? You're looking for the barbecue flavor. You're not, it has nothing to do, you can't even taste the meat. Meat doesn't really have, I don't think, has much flavor in and of itself for the most part, So whether that's tofu or meat, like it's the barbecue that you're after. And there's so many exciting spices that you can use and even vegetables to help build that spice profile or that flavor profile in general, right?
So true.
Without using all of that. And I do no oil, which I know is also can be a huge challenge for people. And at first I was like, okay, so how do I start soup? Like, right. Doesn't everybody put oil in the pan and then they put their onions and
I can't cook.
Right. Whatever it is. And I stopped using it and just use a tiny bit of water, tablespoon of water when they start cooking and sticking, and then it actually helps them cook faster.
What a concept.
Yeah.
That's a new concept.
Right.
But, it's interesting because there are obviously oils that are better than others.
Yes.
One thing I do believe is not a commonly known thing about oils is the burning point. So once you take an oil past its burning point, it becomes carcinogenic. So you're literally stirring your food in.
Right.
Yeah.
And so some of the finishing oils like olive oil, sesame oil should never be heated. Like we don't always think about that. We think about, throw some olive oil in there. But to Michaela's point, that's just, it's way past its burning point. From my experience, I've used avocado oil and ghee as kind of my oils of choice. And with avocado still being a seed oil, like I know that there's some kind of conversations now of even that being something that you don't want to do. If someone were to opt for using oil or some sort of like for the soup example, have you worked with ghee before, or like how would?
But that's because it's not a plant-based.
Right. Okay. That's so true.
So,
Ghee
so that's an out for me.
Ghee is butter. Yeah, basically cooked down so that the milk fat solids are not in there for anyone who's listening. So that makes so much sense as someone who's vegan. Thank you for clarifying.
Well, and I don't use any oil. So I don't even use plant-based butter, plant-based oil, whatever. I mean, all oils are plant-based for the most part, but I try to avoid all of that.
Getting away from oil, and I think getting away from salt can be really impactful. Once you open the spice cabinet and get into some of those other concoctions, you don't have to rely on salt as your main flavor.
Well, and we know that salt increases blood pressure, all those kinds of things. We need some of it. We have to have a little bit of it, but it's easy to avoid. And it's interesting because I was listening to another podcast from Simon Hill, and he had somebody on that was talking about the 4 white poisons, which is sugar, salt, processed like flours, processed greens, and saturated fat.
Interesting.
So I kind of try to keep that in my head
So
too.
everything that's in most of the processed foods
Yes.
that we eat,
Absolutely.
for the
Yeah.
listeners, just to be clear. Okay. If it's in a box, if it's in a can, if it's on the shelf, there's a high chance that it's got a lot of things that aren't good for you.
Yeah.
You know, I am just, I like look at ingredients all the time.
Yeah.
Sometimes when I'm shopping with my husband, he's like, can you not? Like, I'll go through Costco aisles and I'll be like, oh my God, this has this many chemicals in it. And he's like, we're not even going to buy that. Like, what do you, but it's just so interesting to me that this high processed food and food product that's not even, to me, it's not even food,
not
right?
food, yeah.
It's just so readily accessible, and that is what is subsidized, and like that's what we have on an economical level is what is most like affordable in many cases. So yeah, just read your labels, you guys.
Yeah, the affordable piece though is something that I think is so interesting, because when you look at a lot of the processed foods, they're not really all that affordable. And when you start doing the comparison, like I said, do you know how much broccoli or how many carrots you can buy for the same cost of a piece of meat or milk or whatever it is? You know, when you start looking at the price per pound kind of thing comparison, and then additionally, you have all of these environmental things that are going on, right? You have all these single-use plastics that are happening with processed foods, you know, granola bars, every one of them coming in their own little package, and, you know, all of that kind of thing. And so then it's completely unsustainable in every possible way. And yes, you can do, you know, probably recycle the outside container, you know, the box or whatever it is, but we don't have a good way to manage the single-use plastics, right? Even if you have Ridwell or a service that takes plastics. So let's just figure out how can we, and when you're doing the whole food plant-based, you don't have those things. Like I literally, I get so mad when I go into a grocery store. Like occasionally one of the stores puts their organic cucumbers, like wraps them in plastic. Why? I won't buy it.
No,
I won't buy it.
The ones at
I get so
Costco,
mad.
the English cucumbers at Costco are wrapped individually in plastic and then wrapped again, all three together.
Why? I just won't buy it. I just won't buy it. I can't deal with that at all, because you know, I think that's the other piece of the lifestyle medicine thing that I think is interesting, is looking at the environmental end of where we are with this, and you know, how much water it takes to produce things like beef, right? And just animal agriculture as a whole. Like, oof.
I do eat meat, and I've switched to now only eating meat from local farms here in Colorado because and if people can find other options,
but that's so great, because economically, like, right, it doesn't have to come very far, so you don't have the transportation cost. It's probably not wrapped in plastic, right? So you've got that. You can choose what cuts of beef or whatever it is, whatever kind of meat you get. You can choose the cuts that you want. And you're supporting a local farmer.
Exactly. And they're almost always organic or not spraying, at least on a mass level when we talk about non-organic produce or meat or anything like that.
Produced.
Yeah. And it's, for me, I've noticed a health difference too, even if it's just a mindset shift, like you said, of I feel like I'm making a difference in supporting local. But like on a nutrition level too, it's higher quality. It doesn't, there's not as much time between when it's processed and when you're actually eating it. So the actual nutrient content is probably higher.
And this is where taking care of the land is so important as well, right? Is because what the animals are eating. So one thing that I think, you know, the eternal question that people who are whole food plant-based get is what? Where do you get your protein? Where do you get your protein? Guess what? All protein comes from plants. All protein comes from plants. Period. Right? Because the animals eat the plants, and so then it is in their flesh.
The
Same thing with
misconception.
B12.
I'm so on board for that conversation, simply because the misconception is your essentials, right? Your essential amino acids, and in a vegetable-based diet, I have actually seen the latter where people go vegan hoping to make this like healthier lifestyle choice, but do it in an uneducated way.
Yeah.
And there is
there are things you have to pay attention to.
Protein in every, like you can get your complete amount of protein eating a veggie diet.
Yeah.
You just have to be mindful of where you're getting each source of protein, because meat has all of your 9 essential amino acids in that one serving of meat. And so that's an interesting conversation. It's just like a little bit of education.
Yeah. Your body is, though, going to take all those from all the various plants that you're eating, and it's going to rearrange what it needs anyway. So whether it comes in one package or comes in 10 packages, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
If you buy a desk and it comes in pieces, right? Like, does it really matter? You still got a desk.
It's this conversation around impact on environment and our diet. I know, at least in my personal experience, that when I did enter into a commitment to being more diverse in my diet, committed to eating more whole foods, committed to eating organically, all of that, you become attuned more so to what's going on in your environment. And when you start to value, we'll just say, healthier fruits and vegetables, you begin to research where your vegetables are coming from, and you learn about the chemicals. And it's not linear for everybody. It's we all learn on our different paces in different ways, but there is a connection between not caring so much about what you're putting into your body and not caring what big corporations are doing to the food, as much as you get when you start dabbling yourself in that world. It's like peeling back the curtain, opening the box, if you will.
Well, and it's not just that piece of it, but for me, it's not what they're spraying on it, but the spraying on it then is going in the ground, right? And that's going to be lowering our nutrient density. And if you look at foods from, years ago, and then you look at a food now that's being grown, the nutrient density is just not there. And that's why, if you can compost, let's do that, right? We've got such a great, resource in Denver, at least Denver Urban Gardens teaches composting classes. They have, all kinds of community gardens where you can learn that kind of thing. So I feel like that's another thing that people can do that's pretty simple, is either learn how to compost, or, if you don't have time to do the composting yourself, there are lots of services now that will pick up the composting, or places you can take your compost. And that goes then back into the ground and really helps with the nutrient density of the fruits and vegetables that you're going to be growing. And so important.
And the circularity, again, going back to like buying from local places, then your scraps are from local places. And then it goes back to then your compost is then from, all of that. You know what I mean? Like it just kind of creates that circular cycle. I do Denver Compost Collective because I live in a condo and I don't have any outdoor space. And I tried to do it myself on my balcony. Didn't end up going the best.
We gotta get you set up with some worms.
Yeah, exactly. I know. I need to do some more vermicomposting. But and listeners, if you want to dive into this more, we spent a whole conversation with Bethany from Bethany's Botany talking about composting. She's a master composter from Denver Urban Gardens. So we love this conversation about composting.
I just finished.
Finished the master composter?
Yes.
Oh gosh, I'm so excited to learn more about that.
It's an awesome program.
Yeah. This is a good segue for just the topic on how can supportive communities facilitate sustainable health journeys for individuals?
Yeah, so I think this is just like group coaching, right? If you're in conversation with other people and you're experiencing, I do think this is one of the ways in which social media can be really helpful. I'm in a Buy Nothing group, which is a, local free economy, right? So hyper local. If I have something to give, I can put it out there, and people in my neighborhood are going to be able to respond to that. But totally lost where I was going.
That's okay. Just the impact of supportive communities.
So coaching is one of those things that, if you're doing things in community with other people and there's something that you need, or that you're not like, this just isn't clicking with me. How do I how do I do this? How do I add more veggies? I follow this gal on Facebook that does plant-based eating, and she's always incorporating veggies in breakfast, which I just personally, I'm like, I just can't. Broccoli is not a morning food. Like
I literally had broccoli this morning for
I
breakfast.
just cannot. I cannot.
So good.
I just can't. I can do sweet potatoes, and that's about as far as I can get with the veggies or potatoes.
Yeah.
But I can't. I don't know. Anyway,
It's so good.
so it is talking to other people in community around like, what are you doing? Like, how do you do this? And the blueberries in my sweet potato is one of those things that came from a community conversation, right? So like I said, I think going back to the social media, that is something that I think social media helps us with if we're in the right groups and we're asking. But I think when you're in a smaller group coaching kind of setting, or people who are doing the same thing that you're doing, that have the same kind of goals or outcome desires that you do, it helps you to figure out how to incorporate the things that are challenging for you and to move forward in that, right? And then also celebrating with other people when they are successful, like, you got this, and just that emotional lifting people up,
encouragement, and it goes both ways. We benefit from both giving encouragement and receiving encouragement, and so there's that community component for sure. That goes even to that social pillar of lifestyle medicine being so important.
Totally.
And I do think if people don't have the social support, and you see all these memes around like Thanksgiving. If I'm vegan, I'm taking my own food because there's not going to be anything. But when I look at what I'm doing for Thanksgiving, I think, oh my God, like the only thing that is not vegan is the turkey.
Right.
Like, we don't do anything else that's not.
Right.
It's easy enough to do the mashed potatoes without butter and I just use plant milk.
Right.
That's it. Like, there's no rocket science to it.
I recently cut back on dairy. I'd like to say I'm 100% no dairy, but that's just not true. However, a friend of mine, when I was saying, I never thought I'd give up cheese, she's like, you don't have to give up cheese. You just have to give up dairy cheese. And I'm like, thank you for reminding me there are a lot of other options.
Yeah. So my one non-plant-based thing is Parmesan.
Okay.
I just it's just not the same.
It's not. I actually did see a video the other day of someone making a cashew-based Parmesan.
Yeah.
I'll have to send you the video.
I mean, and to be honest, there are lots of different ways to do it. It most often has nutritional yeast in it and things like that.
Yes.
It's just, and I can do that. It's not Parmesan.
No, I know. I'm from Wisconsin, so I can't give up cheese ever.
Oh, I love this.
But I just can't do it. I tried some vegan cheeses and it doesn't work for me. And that's okay.
And here's something else actually that I would say for lots of people. Different plant-based milks and different plant-based cheeses are totally different. Find one that works for you if that's something that you're hoping to do. So I like almost all plant-based milks. But like my daughter doesn't like the cashew milk. It's slimy to her somehow. She prefers the almond milk. And, the soy has more protein. So sometimes I do soy because like I said, I don't really care. And so it's one of those things that try different things, right? And always be figuring out. And if not, connect into some community and ask people, what is your favorite plant-based cheese? Why do you like it? What is your way to substitute? And like I said, I can substitute Parmesan for these, plant-based made things, but I just have to have in my head that's not Parmesan. It is something that I'm putting on there, and sometimes I will use that instead. But I eat so little Parmesan that I'm like, in the big picture of my health.
That's an important concept in lifestyle medicine too.
Right?
I always tell people, you have to feed your soul every once in a while.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. And find those recipes and those things that really, truly, deeply make you happy and satisfied. Right?
Before we have one good wrap-up question, before we jump into our monthly motivation, and before we jump into that, but when we started the podcast right before, you had mentioned that there's a phrase that you give people right before they're about to make a decision on what they're eating. Do you want to share with our audience what that is?
I always say eat like your life depends on it, because it does. So it's always, for me, my husband sometimes will, have a little bit of a fit around like, but I want to eat this kind of thing. And it's like, yeah, well, it's your decision, but eat like your life depends on it, because it does.
So
and,
good.
it's just one of those things that helps with the decision-making process when we are faced with that wonderful smell that comes out of the fast food place, right? Does this help me in my life, in my journey?
Or even shopping, I'm sure. Like keeping that as a mantra as you go through a Costco or a grocery store.
Yeah.
To be more mindful when you are looking at ingredients and things like that.
Yeah. So eat like your life depends on it, because it does.
Love that. What's the most important teaching that you repeat the most to increase a client's understanding and the importance of promoting their health?
Oh, I don't know that I have one, to be honest, because the coaching experience is so personalized, right? It has to be. You have to stay curious about what that person needs and wants from their own life. They're an expert in their own life. So they have to come to that, right?
It's true.
And so I love to educate around some of the nutrition pieces, but when I'm coaching, it's really personalized to that person, to what they, what they have in their heart.
Yeah. Health is not a one size fits all.
Absolutely not. It is truly not. Right. And so figuring out, what are they willing to do? What are they desiring from their life? And how can I help support them and bring some accountability for them? What does that look like? How does that work best for them? That kind of thing. So,
love it.
Yeah.
Well, friends, let's dive into our monthly motivation. Lisken, this is our final segment.
Okay.
So we ask 3 questions to every guest as we release the episodes every month. So our listeners can kind of have some tangible talking points to follow along our journey, but then also get some resources in terms of books and things like that. So the first question we have is, what's one invigorating conversation you've had recently? Michaela, do you want to kick us off with this one?
Invigorating conversation. I had a conversation this morning, for the audience who knows I'm in residential real estate, with a photographer shooting one of my properties, and he communicates with different real estate professionals regularly, and we were talking about the current state of investing in real estate, and it was just invigorating in the sense of kind of like lifestyle. There's no one size fits all. So the conversation was centered around, there's just no one way to approach purchasing your first property, building a rental portfolio. And in terms of where you choose to live, like where you choose to put your roots down, it is so personal to you. We were just talking about the dimensionality between living here, somewhere like Colorado, we have the mountain range, very active, versus living somewhere in Texas. The climate is completely different. There's different activities depending on where you live in the state. And so just to circle it back, I found that was just a different lens of a conversation was centered in how your environment impacts your lifestyle.
Yeah.
So, Haley?
I was saying as we were starting this that I don't know if I've had an invigorating conversation recently, and I'm just going to stick with that answer because I want to give space for our listeners to know that when we're talking about health and we're talking about sustainability and non-toxicity in the home, like there's a lot going on. And I've just been really sitting with this idea that like everything I do needs to keep improving. And like, and at some level there, at least for me, there's a narrative of like, I'm not doing enough. And that's something that I'm really trying to find acceptance with. So I haven't had a lot of invigorating conversations. I've been spending a lot of time alone, honing in on building my business. And I'm feeling just very invigorated by all of that and just kind of having some solitude. So a little bit of a one-off answer there for that one. But Lisken, do you have an invigorating conversation unlike me?
Yeah, I actually do. I would say for me, we had our lifestyle medicine, health and wellness coaches member interest group meeting last night. And we go into these small group, breakout rooms on Zoom. And there were 3 questions. And one of the questions was something around the idea of like, what would you do if you were less inhibited? And so it was just interesting to hear people talk about that. And also to think about, so what if we were partnering with them when they, there were a couple of people that I was like, oh, I know somebody that I could connect you with that would help you be able to make that next step. Because a couple of people were like, yeah, I would love to reach out to other professionals in this field and, but I just don't get there, or I don't know who to connect with, or that kind of thing. So I feel like I left that meeting thinking about not only connections that I can make between people, but also like, how do we make that next step personally? Like, what is holding us back? What would happen if we're less inhibited,
Yeah.
So it was just, it was a great meeting. So
I love that. What is something that you've read recently or that you are currently reading?
So something I've read recently, I've read all of the books on nature's therapy, forest bathing, all that kind of stuff. I've read like 3 books recently on that.
We just talked with, like Michaela was saying, April Thompson, who kind of does that in her practice. And so this is going to be such a great follow-up for people. So forest bathing, are there any specific books or authors that you can share it with us after, but we'd love to link those in the show notes for people to check those out.
Yeah. I don't remember who the various ones were, but there were 3 different books, and it's something that I'm looking into because I feel like in Colorado, how do you not incorporate that into what you're doing? Right? It's so powerful. So yeah.
Michaela.
Well, I am obsessed with the intersection between the physical and the metaphysical.
Yes, you are.
The spirituality and the science. And so right now I am listening to an audio called Becoming Supernatural by Joe Dispenza. It's just a good book.
I love Dispenza.
Yeah,
I love all this stuff.
I'm just now diving into some of his work.
And Bruce.
And,
what is
Bruce
like?
Lipton.
Yes.
He's one of Biology of Belief is a fave. That's actually a book I'd recommend for the listeners. Biology of Belief by Bruce Lipton is basically a book that bridges the gap between science and spirituality and talks about how at the very basis level of our cells, like the cells are listening in our body at all times. So it's just important to have a positive narrative about your life. So Joe Dispenza, he's teaching me deeper meditation skills, and I love it. What about you, Haley?
I am reading Radical Acceptance by Dr. Tara Branch. And she takes a very integrative approach to mental health therapy in that there's a physical, mental, and spiritual connection. And so she goes through just the book is really laid out in a great way because she discusses a lot of anecdotal experiences with her own clients and kind of real world situations. And I don't know, sometimes with self-help books, like if there's not that real world connection, I'm kind of like, it's hard for me to consume. So there's not necessarily a storyline there, but the individual stories kind of throughout the books as she's explaining these concepts have been really interesting to connect with. And just the part I'm at, I'm maybe like 75% through right now, but the part that she's talking about is finding acceptance with yourself and allowing yourself to feel connected to your own healing. The mantra that she offered is to say to yourself, like, I care about your healing, to yourself. Like, I care about this suffering, and may you not have to suffer anymore. And so to take that approach of bringing acceptance of where you're at to a physical level of you repeating it to yourself, reprogramming that subconscious. I don't know. I just haven't had like the tangible kind of, I guess, resources to understand that. So her book, again, Radical Acceptance, love it. It's been really interesting. I'm listening on Spotify on audiobook, but really great book. The last question we have for you, Lisken, is what's one non-toxic swap that you've either recently made in your home or that you're excited to make?
So I have been doing kind of sustainability work in my life. I am like try to do zero waste, all of those kinds of things for a long, long time, recycle, reuse, all of the things. So when I saw this question, I was like, oh my God, what? But I've recently subscribed to Ridwell to do the plastic recycling. And I feel like it's not really a swap, but I'm pretty consistent about trying to think about what I'm buying and if I can buy something that's not in plastic, like the cucumbers that we were talking about.
Yeah.
If I can buy it not in plastic, I just won't do it. You know,
Right.
like I can't make my own bread. And so I'm going to have some plastic.
Sure.
I can make my own bread. I do not have
Choose not
time to
to.
make my own
Choose
bread
not
at
to.
this juncture. And so, you know, using Ridwell, I think is kind of the next best thing. So they will pick up the plastics every other week. And so I can reduce that, but I can't eliminate it right now. And so,
You know, it might not be a swap, but it's an evolution.
right?
It's an
Yeah,
opportunity
exactly.
to add in
Yeah.
some improvement there.
Yeah,
I love that.
definitely. What about you guys?
I have been swapping out my skincare and makeup for over a year now.
Nice.
The Environmental Working Group, the EWG.org, has a Skin Deep database where you can type in any skincare product, makeup product, hair product, fragrance, and it'll tell you a rating out of 10 how toxic this substance is and what chemicals or potential health concerns from those chemicals you might be exposed to. So that's been something that I think is really important. And you guys might have heard me say this on previous podcast episodes, but to me, the biggest thing is starting, whether it's clothing, whether it's skincare, makeup, what is closest to your skin is, for me, the most toxic, and what we're putting inside of our bodies, so food as well, is the most important thing when it comes to toxic swaps in the home or non-toxic swaps. Even, you know, things that we're using in the home care products, cleaning products, things like that, also kind of the same thing. You're using that, you're breathing it in. But yeah, skincare and makeup, something that I was very surprised to realize how toxic it actually is.
And did you know that your skin is your largest organ?
Yes,
right?
It is. It is
important
so
to take care of it well.
It is so porous. Like, I mean, not to like go off on a tangent on the clothing. I'm so passionate about like synthetic clothing because the same thing, when you are wearing it all the time, sweating in it, potentially your body is taking that in, and it's just it leads to hormone disruption, potential cancers. I mean, it's just there's a lot of health impacts that we're now unraveling as it becomes this mass production. Again, it's just a different area of mass production. We talked a lot about food, but this one, you know, like textiles and clothing is a huge one as well. So yeah, skincare and makeup, ewg.org/skin deep. Michaela.
Yeah, I was actually this morning, I was making a smoothie and I use these, I have reusable straws. So I made the swap to reusable a few years ago, but they're plastic. I was like, we could do better. So that's the next swap. I'm actually probably going to go today and grab some stainless steel straws that I can use for my
Actually, I'm
smoothies.
going to recommend something.
Yeah.
Glass.
Yeah, glass too.
They're
really?
so great.
Okay.
They're so great. It's like you know how different products and stuff have different mouth feel. Like it's just it's
Ooh, classy.
or like different knitting needles have different feel.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Glass is just like
it's great.
Yeah.
I also like with glass that you can see inside, where like if you've had a smoothie,
right,
you can just easily see is it clean?
Yeah.
Or do I need to clean it more?
Because
sometimes with
those
you're right.
It's
reusable
risky.
ones, you never know.
Okay, well, that's my next swap. So
I love that. Amazing. Well, Lisken, where can people connect with you outside of the podcast?
Awesome. Yeah. So I think probably the easiest is just to email me. It's Lisken, Lisken, at wholehealthalchemy.com. So yeah, feel free to reach out and I'd love to chat.
Wonderful. For our listeners, we really want to know what you are learning, what you've learned today from Lisken, what questions you may have on the topics that we discussed today. So let us know in the comments by emailing us at info@soulfulsustainableliving.com. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Soulful Sustainable Living with Haley and Michaela. We truly feel so grateful that you're here and listened to today's episode. We would love to connect with you further at Soulful Sustainable Living on Instagram. And if you have someone that we should be talking to or you would like to come on our podcast, please reach out to us at info@soulfulsustainableliving.com. We appreciate you. Take care of yourself today. Always sending you love and peace.